Welcome to Two Brothers Talking. I'm Israel.
And I'm Eli.
Today's episode, we're going to identify the top 3 instances where leadership goes wrong.
And we'll also share our 3 tips on how you can become an inspiring leader.
Instance number 1, you micromanage your folks. Now, I've been on the receiving end of this, and even in my first couple of years as a leader, I struggle with this, and it often stems from a desire to control the outcome. When you micromanage, it does a few things. 1, it tells your people you don't trust them. You don't trust their ability to do their job, and you don't trust yourself as a leader that have created an environment where they can do their job. I remember a few times in my first couple of years as a leader, I struggled with this mainly because I wanted to ensure that people were doing their best because we had goals to meet, but I failed to connect the impact that my actions of micromanaging them had on their performance, on their mental health, on their comfort level of bringing their best self to work. And it ended up with a team of folks that were fearful rather than joyful to come to work. They were scared that they were going to get in trouble per se by getting on a performance path to where we had discussions about their performance not doing so well. They were worried more about what was going to happen if they didn't meet that goal versus enjoying the work that we were doing because we were doing some great work. And as a new leader, and even as a tenured leader, when you micromanage your folks, you send several wrong messages, but you ultimately shoot yourself in the foot, because as a leader, your goal is to create an environment where people feel safe to come in and do their job. You set the tone, you set the standard for morale. You do a lot of things to contribute to the overall health of the team. And so micromanaging is one of the top instances where leadership can go wrong. And that's a behavior that if you're doing today, that needs to stop.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a very important piece where it's very rarely done with ill intent.
Yeah.
It's done with the right motives. You want to make sure you're doing well. You want to make sure as a team they're performing. And it's kind of like one of those, I beat you because I care. You want the team to do well. You want them, even if your desire for the team is, hey, I want you guys to be, get a bonus or what have you. It can come from the right motives. It can come from the right place. But anyone who's been micromanaged can tell you it's not fun.
No.
It's so much extra work for the person who's doing the micromanaging because now you're managing yourself, you're managing your people. And I really like the nomenclature that a company we work for uses. They don't do manager, they do leader. Yeah. Because there's a big difference. Managing is trying to prevent problems. Leading is leading someone through a problem. Yeah. So you're going to have problems. I always treat, work kind of like a wedding. Something's going to go wrong. It's really just how well you're going to come out of that, how well you're going to handle that issue. And with micromanaging, you can actually create a lot of issues just simply in the way you're managing. That micromanaging can make things difficult for everyone involved, but so much worse for the leader. And I wouldn't be surprised if I had high turnover in my team if I was micromanaging. I've worked for several managers who micromanaged like crazy, and I can't tell you how many times in the seeking of making me a better worker, they got in the way. Yeah. They would pull me from doing duties to micromanage how I was doing that duty. And then I would get back in there and I would have no idea where I was. I had lost track of the task I was taking care of. I would make mistakes and I would have coaching after that, but like, hey, you made a mistake. And I didn't want to just be like, yes, because you won't stop interrupting. You won't stop trying to redo the work I've already done. And there's a difference between, managing expectations and holding someone accountable and micromanaging. And it can come from a place of, trying to do good. And I think that makes it all the worse when it has that negative impact on your team, because your team can, like you said, have that perception of, I don't want to get in trouble. And if they don't know why they're getting in trouble, or it almost seems like there's nothing they can do right, that can lower the morale of a team like a stone.
I think an example of micromanaging can be something similar to what you were talking about, where you have someone complete a task or you ask someone to do a certain job, and while they're doing that job, you pull them away to ask them if they're doing the job. Yeah. but also you're pestering them with questions about what they're doing, why they're doing it this way, instead of trusting that you as a leader set the expectation. This is what the job is. This is how I'd like you to do it. As a leader, you should have taught them how to do it, or maybe you hired them with that experience already. So you have to trust in yourself as well as a leader to have made the right decision about them or provided the training and resources they needed, but also trust that they need that environment to do the job. So an example of micromanaging, while someone is maybe in the office, is you're IMing them constantly. Hey, can I get an update on that task? Hey, what are you doing right now? Hey, why are you doing it that way? Hey, why are you checking your email? So you're tapping in maybe to their work system to monitor their work progress or what have you. And again, like Eli said, we don't want to confuse micromanaging with accountability because they're two stark contrasts, and there can't be accountability without proper expectations. So this is micromanagement is where you haven't set the right expectations, because if you did, you wouldn't need to be following up. You'd be able to trust in the person. Now, we believe in an ideology per se, not necessarily an ideology, but maybe more of an idea of trusting and verifying. And so that's where that accountability is. You trust that the person is doing the job and they're doing it well and to the best of their ability, but you're also verifying after the fact to make sure the job was done. Because if you ask someone to do the job and they don't do it, and then when you're held accountable, you can't blame the person because you as a leader are responsible for the overall outcome of the team. So we want to separate, of course, accountability and trusting and verifying versus micromanagement. We're strictly talking about micromanagement in this. Instance number 2 of where leadership can go wrong is treating your employees like competition.
Oh, yeah.
Now, have you ever had an employee that was like a star and they're legitimately like a star? They show up to work, they succeed at everything they do, their communication just comes naturally, and they're constantly being recognized by not only their peers, but even your leaders. And this is something that every leader should dream of having, maybe not just one, but a team full of these star folks. It's not something you should dread. And the reason why is you have an opportunity here to take what is working, right, in this person or people and capture it as the best practice and pass it on to your team and to the rest of your organization. You can even apply some of that to your own development as well. And when you see folks that are succeeding either on your team or in your sphere of influence, and you see them as competition, you're blinded. And instead of helping them succeed and taking the opportunity that's being handed to you, try to sabotage them.
And I've been on both sides of this, unfortunately. But when a leader sees their employees as competition, this can often be some indicating factor of some underlying issues. And like you said, it should be something that, oh man, great, I've got a star. I want to embrace that. I want to, get my team to that level. It's easy to start the comparison game, or they're going to take my job, or something like that. And as a leader, that's the wrong mentality to have. And I think that can be indicative of a couple underlying issues. One could be insecurity, whether that's insecurity in your job, insecurity in your person, thinking, well, I have to be the best because I'm a leader. That's not true. Even as a leader, there were people who were better at certain aspects of a job than I was. And that wasn't something to berate myself about. Yes, I can improve. I can spend time on making sure that I'm trying to get to that level. But that's not something I would want to punish them for or be afraid of them for. So that underlying issue is really what you want to address. Okay, why am I treating them like competition? Am I afraid of losing my job? Or are we just needing to change our perspective? And we'll get into a couple of tips on how to be a good leader a little bit later. But yeah, seeing them as competition can be very detrimental to not only being a leader, but you might find yourself alienating that person that you see as competition, or those people you see as competition, and not only not being a good leader to them, but now you're holding them back. And you're punishing them for being good, which is kind of counterproductive to a good culture where someone comes in as a shining star. You don't want to snuff that out because of our insecurities or because of our wrong perspective.
I remember an instance of where at the time I didn't understand why this leader gave me a piece of advice, but later come to find out they had seen me as competition. I was doing pretty well in my role, and there was an opportunity to take on a temporary leadership role. And so I go to my leader and said, this is a great opportunity. This will help me develop. And they said, that's a waste of time. Don't do it. And so I didn't do it. And then a permanent leadership position opened up. And I said, you know what? Should I go for it? They're like, yeah, you should go for it. Knowing full well that I didn't have the experience that position, the temporary one, could have presented me. And it did a couple of things for the perception of me. During the interview, I was asked, why didn't you apply for the temporary one? And I didn't have anything to say because I wasn't going to throw my leader under the bus and say, well, they told me not to do it. And so as I was getting feedback, I don't know if you remember, this was earlier in the season where I talked about a senior leader gave me, some feedback about the perception about me, me being, arrogant and standoffish. This was a piece of it where they said, because you didn't go for the temporary one, it looks like that was beneath you. Because you weren't getting the pay with it and the permanent title, you didn't want to go for it.
Yeah.
And that was far from the truth. My leader at the time had told me that's a waste of time. But what I didn't understand at the time, and I do now, because of conversations I've had with that past leader where we've amended some of that broken relationship, is they saw me as competition. And they did not want to see me succeed. Therefore, they told me, don't go into that development role because that'll help you succeed in the permanent role. Yeah. And so leaders and future leaders, let me tell you something. When you're focused so much on yourself that you're keeping somebody else from succeeding, you're doing not only yourself a disservice, but you're doing that person. My first couple of years as a leader, I struggled unnecessarily because I didn't have some key fundamentals in place that developmental role could have taught me. Yep. Therefore, more people suffered under my poor leadership than they needed to. And so it's kind of like a snowball effect where you're not only affecting yourself, but you're also affecting somebody else and potentially multiple other people's lives.
Absolutely.
The third instance of poor leadership is where you put your development on the back burner. And this goes hand in hand with the other two, because if you're developing yourself, you're not going to have the urge or the need to micromanage. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to have the time to see your people as competition because you're always working on yourself to be a better leader for other people. And I think every new leader, and even maybe some leaders that have been in their role, they struggle with this because either you've got too much on your plate, you don't have enough time in the day, maybe you feel like you've arrived. You've all stopped developing yourself. We've been there too. And this is one of the worst things you can do as a leader because you stop growing. And I remember many times where I put my development on the back burner because, again, I was busy. I was struggling. And so I said, you know what? Well, the best thing I can do is just put myself on the back burner. And I thought that was being selfless, but instead I was being selfish. And my dad always taught us that you're never going to reach a point where you can't learn more. Whether you're working on your education, you're improving your communication skills, you're adding to your technical skills, you're staying up to date on emerging trends in your industry. Self-development should be a high priority and shouldn't be seen as selfish. It should be seen as selfless. And when you put your own development on the back burner, that's being selfish because now what you're doing, you're stunting your growth, as I mentioned. Therefore, you're not able to contribute at your highest level and give to the people that you're leading your best.
Absolutely. And I've been here as a leader. I got a leadership position. I thought, oh, great, I'm here. I'm good. I don't need to keep developing myself. And that was terrible for my team because I could only take them so far. Yeah. And as a leader, you can only take your team as far as you're willing to grow. Some of your team members may be better at certain things than you, but if you stop developing, if you stop growing as a leader, you're really shortening them on how far they can go as well. And I made this mistake, and I saw it, at the end of that role. And when I moved to a different company, I was like, man, I really shorted them due to a lack of vision in my own development. And like you said, if you have this in proper perspective, it eliminates a lot of that micromanaging. It eliminates this thing as competition because you have to understand that everyone in every role is developing. Yeah. No one is in a role that's doing what it should be doing, where they stop developing. So you don't see your employees as competition because hey, they're developing, so am I. My vision shouldn't stop with the role I'm at.
Yeah.
And even if you're in a role like, what, I'm good here, I don't want to go any higher. And there are roles like that in every company. I've spoken with my leaders in the past, and they said, hey, how far would you want to go? And I said, honestly, just like the next level would be enough, because I know that after that, the work-life balance becomes, in my opinion, a little skewed. I don't want to work for a living. I want to work for a living. I don't want to live to work.
Yeah.
And I've had positions like that in the past. In fact, this leadership position I'm talking about, where I live to work.
Yeah.
I was at work constantly. If I wasn't at work, I was thinking about work. And that's not a work-life balance that I wanted to continue or replicate. I wanted work to be work and life to be life. And I see that there are certain levels where that's just a little too far for me professionally. And your mileage may vary, but your development shouldn't stop, even if you're staying in the same position. Your development should constantly be going. And exactly. I equate it to things like bodybuilding or, working out. You can see the person who's focused their time on developing themselves because you can see it.
Yeah.
They've got those bulging shoulders and those huge biceps or that thin waist or what have you. The same is true professionally. It's just the people who know what to look for are the ones that see it.
Yeah.
So there may be people who don't recognize you're developing in yourself, but those who are at a higher level or a higher maturity or a higher professional caliber, they will see that development you're doing on yourself. They will see, this person has the skills.
Yeah.
This person is the rock star that I need in this next position. The hard part is this is one of those you have to do it consistently. And if you lack that consistency, if you lack that self-development, it's going to show in the long run in what your team is able to do.
Here are 3 tips to how to be a successful and inspiring leader.
Tip 1, empower your people. When a leader empowers their folks, it empowers their whole team. And it may seem kind of like, you just said the same thing twice. There's a difference.
Yeah.
There are certain people you can empower, certain people you might not want to, and that's going to be specific to your team makeup. There are some folks that they're not ready for that empowerment. Maybe they need a little more help just getting developed to a place where they can be empowered to make decisions. But empowering people in your team shows everyone there's potential to grow. There's potential to develop. There's potential to step into a leadership role. Even if that's not something they want, they can at least get better, even within their own current role. So empowering your whole team, it frees them up for other pursuits. It frees them up for developmental opportunities. It frees them up for shadowing. It frees them up for a number of things. And they also can kind of create a support for themselves. We talk a lot about leadership, and it's busy.
Yeah.
If you're a leader, you're busy.
Yeah.
And you know it. And one of the things that empowering your people can do is it can free up some of that time because you're able to trust them with some of the tasks that may or may not take up time. I forget the principle, but there was a number specific principle of saying you should be able to delegate at least this much of your work so you can focus on the rest. And if you feel like, oh man, I can't delegate anything, maybe you should look into empowering your people and understand that empowering your people does not mean they're ready to go to be the leader. It doesn't mean that they're never going to make mistakes. That's part of the risk of empowering people. They're going to make mistakes, but the opportunity there is, again, to continue that development and correct the mistakes, show them that's nothing to the world.
Yeah.
And if you show people that in the empowerment, they're able to make mistakes and it's not going to be, burn the building down, we're done, guys. You may find that people that you may not have expected to be power players suddenly step in the limelight and say, if it's okay if I make a mistake, I'm ready to grow.
Yeah.
And I've seen people who I did not expect to perform like they did suddenly become a rock star because they saw that making a mistake was not the end of the world. And the only thing holding them back was the fear of what if I do something wrong? So allowing people to understand that making mistakes is okay and that it's all right to empower your people alleviates a lot of stress. It alleviates a lot of potentially bad morale. Because one of the worst things for an employee is to work in a position and see that there's no room to grow. There's nowhere to go. And I've worked in industries before where if my direct leader didn't move, I was going nowhere.
Yeah.
And it's disheartening. I can only work at a place like that for so long before I'm going to leave.
I've only seen positives come out of empowering your people. Not only to do their job alone without you micromanaging them, but to make decisions on their own that have an impact on the business. When you do that, you'll be pleasantly surprised at how well they rise to the occasion, how beautiful they blossom. as an employee and as even a leader. And what it does is it creates that environment we were talking about earlier where they feel safe because they feel trusted. And then they can bring their self to work. They feel safe to make those mistakes Eli was talking about. They feel safe to be honest and say, I don't know what I don't know. Can you teach me? I have questions. We talked about that several episodes ago with the fake it till you make it mentality, where that's so detrimental. That's not a positive. That's not something to be proud of, where you're like, yeah, I'm just faking it till I make it. No, you're struggling. It's okay to struggle. Ask for help. And when you empower your employees or your people, people can then cast off that terrible mindset and mentality of the fake it till you make it and ask for the help they need. And also, when people bring their full self to work, it's a game changer. Imagine having an entire team that is locked in and committed to doing the job at the best of their abilities. Imagine the impact that you can have on your customers, on your bottom line, and I feel the most important, your culture.
Yeah.
Your culture as a team, your culture as an organization, it can grow and it can flourish because your people are empowered. Tip number 2 is develop your team. Instead of seeing your folks as competition, see them as partners. You should feel privileged to be a leader, period. But when you have a team that you can pass your knowledge on to and help them realize their potential and help them get there, that is incredibly rewarding. Make it a priority to spend at least one of your coaching sessions or your one-on-ones with them focused on their development. Ask them questions about what they see as their strengths and their opportunities. Because when you're presenting their strengths and you're presenting their opportunities, more likely than not, they're going to be like, okay. But when they're involved in it and they do the self-reflection and they're able to exercise the skill of self-awareness, you can either say, yep, we both agree on that. I agree that's your strength. I agree that's your opportunity. Or you can redirect if necessary. And this not only gives you a chance to see where they're at on the self-awareness scale, but it also allows them the opportunity to buy in to the action plan that you both put in place, because it's specifically tailored to their development. When you put development of your team behind performance is always going to suffer.
Absolutely. And if you ever see people who monitor the stock market, they can be the most detail attentive people you'll ever see. And you may be like, why do they watch the numbers so closely? Because they've invested.
Yeah.
And the people on your team, if they are allowed to invest and they're allowed to be brought into the conversation beyond just, corrective conversations. You said coachings about their development, and it's easy to kind of fall into that. Well, we already talked about their development. I talk about what they're doing wrong. That's not the same thing. There's a difference between telling someone how they can improve and asking them how they can improve. One is you dictating to someone how to act. The other is them bringing out from themselves, this is how I think I can get better. And that buy-in is the difference between success and failure for a lot of people. Some people, they are good with just receiving orders and doing it. That's all they need. Most people need the buy-in. They need to invest.
Yeah.
They need to see that not only do they matter, does their input matter, but it's required. That engagement is the difference between I'm coming to work and I'm showing up to work.
Yeah, and new leaders, tenured leaders, you're listening to this and you're saying, you know what, I don't even have the time to develop myself. We just talked about that. Now you want me to develop my people? How am I going to do that? I don't have the time. I'm literally working 60, 80 hours a week. It doesn't have to be all that time consuming.
Yeah.
As a leader, you've learned to multitask. We've all had to do that on several occasions. Now there can be detriment in the multitasking to your performance, but not necessarily in your killing two birds with one stone while you're developing people. Here's what I mean by that. We talked about empowering your people, right? Your person on the team has expressed interest in leadership. So you're empowering them to make some decisions that a leader might, whether that be assisting their peers, answering their questions, but you're also developing them in that sense, where they're exercising a skill they might not have the opportunity to do so in the past.
Yeah.
And so in your development coaching, in your performance coaching that you should be having with your people, you're talking about this and they're like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be a leader. Or maybe I just want to get better in communication. So now you take advantage of that opportunity that you've had that conversation and say, okay, we're going to try this. Let's do some, what's that called? Where do you practice?
Like role play?
Yeah, role play. Thank you. You do some role play in that instance. So you've provided some development, some training, some resources. It's a safe place for them to maybe practice a couple of talk paths or maybe make some mistakes safely. Then you send them out there. Now, if you have to do something and your team needs to still be supported, you can say, hey, so-and-so, you were looking for development in this area. I'm going to empower you to be the quasi-leader in this instance while I'm gone. Answer the team questions, support them, whatever the case may be. Now they're getting that development, that real life experience. And then you can go back and say, okay, how did that go? You can seek feedback from their peers about their communication. Maybe something that can be worked on, maybe something that they did really well so you can recognize them. And so you're killing multiple birds with one stone, more than two. And you're not adding anything else to your plate because you're using the things that you're already doing to help yourself, help your people, and thus it empowers them, it develops them. And that leads us into, tip number 3, which is develop yourself.
Absolutely. And like we said before, it's a must. It can't be the afterthought. It can't be, oh, I'll get to when I have time. One thing that we've found and we know now, especially in life, is that you won't find time for things. You have to make time. No one is just going to trip and fall into the gym and get swole. It's not going to happen. You have to dedicate time to it. The same is true for your development. You have to dedicate time to your development. You like that swole, Joe? You have to dedicate time to it. It's not something that's going to happen by accident. No one ever became a Fortune 500 company overnight by accident.
Yeah.
They didn't trip and fall into $1 bazillion. I don't think Steve Jobs ever tripped and fell onto a computer and it just came together and he's like, oh man, here you go. Nikola Tesla did not just trip and fall into electricity. Edison didn't trip and fall into a light bulb. There were a bunch of people at work there.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that your development is something you make time for. You want to develop yourself more when you're a leader, not less. Your development shouldn't stop or slow when you're a leader. You should be developing yourself more. You should be pouring into your development at a greater extent. Your people can only develop with you as far as you can take them. And that also has to come with your interactions with your team. I know that in a leadership role, there were sometimes I would go too far in a correction or sometimes not far enough. And there's one thing to, I made a mistake. And then developing from that, making a change, and having honest, candid conversations with your leader about how you handle certain things. And then there's just, I made a mistake. I'm going to beat myself over that. I'm going to beat myself up over that for the next 3 months. That's not going to help anybody. And now your team sees you're kind of sulking in the background like, I made a mistake. That's not what a leader does. A leader accepts the mistake that was made, moves forward, and that empowers them to do the same.
Now, we've established that you have to make time for development because it's not going to happen on accident. But what does that look like? Well, you could either add that to the front of your day, the back of your day. If that doesn't work for you, just mix it into your day. Development doesn't need to be this grandiose thing or this added task. It can be an and to whatever you're doing. What I mean by that is if you already are working on a project, whether it be you're developing a report or you're putting together a business plan, what's something that you're not very strong in, whether that's putting together the presentation, maybe that's transitions for the slides, maybe it's a little bit more difficult than that, and maybe it's a little bit more intricate than that. It's formulas in Excel. Whatever the case may be, you're already working on it. You want to put out a good product. Why not take the opportunity to develop? While you're doing it, watch a how-to video. So you do it step by step with that person that's teaching you how to do it. Maybe bring in somebody that you know is really good at it. Say, hey, I have this project I want to work on. Can you help me? And so taking the opportunities that you already have to develop and still do your job at the same time can ensure you're not adding more to your plate. You're actually helping yourself out. You're being kind to your future self. It's what I always say. It's like future Israel is going to be happy with what I'm doing right now because it's going to help them in the future. And so when you learn to be intentional, instead of adding to your plate or seeing it as, oh gosh, something else I have to do, and seeing it as, you know what, this is going to help me succeed in what I'm doing. This is going to help my people succeed. Making the time, making the time to do it is a priority, and it should be seen as a priority. But once you see it through that lens where I can still do my job successfully, not add time to my day, and develop, whether it's a TED Talk, you're reading a book, whatever the case may be, develop. Make it a priority, because you're not only impacting yourself, but you're also impacting your future self, but the people that you lead, the people that you serve, the people that are around you, because you're getting better at whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned, ask someone for help. You'd be surprised how often people like being asked for help. Yeah. I used to think like, oh, I'm bothering these people if I'm asking them to, kind of show me the ropes. I found most people really like being like, oh, you want my help?
Yeah.
I certainly I can help you with that. It's an empowerment to them.
Yep.
And there have been times when I'd be working through something. I was like, I know this is kind of a strange question. Can I watch you do this once or twice just to make sure that I'm covering all the bases? And I'm like, oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that developmental, I'm already here. Like you said, I'm already here. I'm already going to do it. Might as well get the most out of it. A lot of it's just a change in perspective. A lot of what you'll find in leadership is we have to have the right perspective. If we look at stuff like, oh, it's one more thing I do, that's the wrong perspective. That's going to burn you out. That's going to, oh, I only have so many hours in the day. And that might be, a reason to go back to some of our previous episodes where we talk about time management, building a time budget, taking advantage of, the tools that we have available to us, especially in today's age with the bazillions of calendar apps and all these things, guys. We are more equipped today to be efficient than ever before in history.
Now, we know there are so many other poor behaviors that can be corrected as a leader, and so many more tips that we can provide. But for the sake of the shortness of this video, we provided 3 and 3. If there are more that you want to learn about, or maybe you have questions on, maybe there's something we didn't cover, or you want more explanation on, drop it in the comments below. Let us know. Tag us in a post in social media. We'll be happy to dive into that. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your family and friends.
And ring that bell so you can be notified when we come up with new content.